Some nights feel heavier than others. For Jamie, a 26-year-old single mum, the wait started the moment she clocked in at the supermarket. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The aisles smelled faintly of detergent and stale coffee, and her feet already ached before her shift had even begun. Still, she pushed her cart of boxes forward, stacking shelves as if each can of soup and each bag of rice was another brick, holding her little world together. She wasn't just working for herself, she was working for Ethan, her 6-year-old boy with a smile too bright to dim. Ethan had asthma, the kind that needed regular medicine and checkups Jamie could barely afford. That was why she took every extra shift, stayed late when the manager asked, and never complained about the long hours. Every dollar meant keeping the lights on, paying the rent on their small apartment, and making sure Ethan could breathe a little easier at night. It was close to midnight when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She glanced at the screen and smiled. A drawing popped up, a stick figure of a woman with a cape flying above a tall grey building. Beneath it, in Ethan's messy handwriting, were the words, "Supermom." Jamie's throat tightened. She typed back quickly, "Finish your homework and get some sleep, buddy. I'll be home soon." She slipped the phone away before her manager could notice, but the picture stayed in her mind, a small spark of warmth against the cold grind of the night. Around her, the store was winding down, but the fatigue never left. She thought about the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, the letter from Ethan's school reminding her about summer programs she couldn't afford, the inhaler that always seemed to run out too quickly. Still, Jamie straightened cans with a practiced hand, humming quietly so she wouldn't lose herself in worry. To most shoppers passing through, she was invisible, just another tired worker in a uniform. But Jamie knew every shift mattered. And on this night, the night when her life would change forever, she had no idea that a man with more power than she could imagine was about to walk through those sliding glass doors and shatter her fragile balance in a single blow. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, letting in a gust of night air that carried more than just the chill. Jamie glanced up from her cart, and her stomach tightened the way it always did when someone important walked in. She didn't recognize the man at first, but the store manager sure did. He came rushing across the floor, wiping his palms on his tie, his voice dropping into that nervous tone employees knew too well. "Mr. Dalton," he stammered, almost bowing. "Good evening, sir." Jamie froze for half a second. She had seen Dalton's face on billboards and in the local paper, always smiling next to glossy pictures of new apartment towers. He was the kind of man who didn't wait in line, didn't hear the word no. People said he practically owned half the city. And here he was, striding into her supermarket with a group of assistants trailing behind him, one of them already barking at the staff about a missing delivery. Dalton barely looked around. His eyes were sharp and restless, the kind that scanned a room and judged it unworthy. Jamie lowered her head and kept stocking shelves, hoping to go unnoticed, but luck wasn't on her side. "Hey you," one of his assistants snapped, pointing straight at her. "You're in charge here tonight." Jamie swallowed hard. I'm just filling shelves," she said quietly, brushing her hands on her apron. Dalton's gaze settled on her like a weight. He held up a printed order form. "This," he said flatly, "was supposed to be delivered today. Do you see it anywhere? Because I don't." His voice wasn't raised, but it carried the kind of authority that silenced the air around him. Jamie's heart raced. She knew the order. It was a shipment that hadn't arrived from the warehouse. She had checked earlier. "Sir, I'm sorry, that item didn't come in tonight. It should be here tomorrow morning." Dalton's jaw tightened. "Tomorrow," he repeated like the word was an insult. "Do you understand I have investors flying in? I don't wait for tomorrow." The assistants nodded, scribbling notes, as if his every word was law. Jamie stood straighter, trying to hold her ground. "It's out of my control, sir. I wish I could fix it right now, but—" "Excuses!" Dalton cut in sharply, waving her words away like smoke. His voice rose, drawing the attention of the late-night shoppers nearby. "This is what's wrong with people like you. No accountability, no urgency. Just clock in, clock out, and hope someone else cleans up the mess." Heat rushed to Jamie's face. Every eye in the aisle felt like it was pressing down on her. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the shelves of cereal and canned beans. But she also thought of Ethan at home, drawing superheroes on scrap paper, believing his mum could face anything. Jamie took a breath. "I'm doing my best, sir," she said softly. Dalton leaned in, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "Your best," he whispered coldly, "isn't nearly good enough." And just like that, the night began to unravel. The argument drew more eyes than Jamie could bear. A couple at the end of the aisle pretended to compare cereal boxes, but their heads tilted just enough to watch. An older man with a basket lingered nearby, shaking his head as if he disapproved but unwilling to step closer. Even a young cashier, halfway through bagging groceries, froze and stared before quickly looking away. It wasn't just Dalton's voice that filled the store, it was the silence of everyone else. And then she saw him, Ethan. Her neighbour, Mrs. Garcia, had brought him by just as she promised, so Jamie could walk him home after her shift. The boy was clutching his little backpack, his sneakers squeaking as he ran toward her. His face lit up when he spotted his mum, but the smile collapsed when Dalton's booming voice cut through the air. "Pathetic service! This is why nothing works anymore!" Dalton barked, jabbing a finger toward Jamie. Ethan froze, caught between them. His wide brown eyes flickered from his mum's pale face to the furious man towering over her. Jamie's heart dropped. She tried to wave Ethan back, desperate to protect him from the scene, but Dalton noticed. A cruel smirk touched his lips. "Is this your kid?" he sneered. "Figures." Jamie's chest burned. She could take the insults aimed at herself. She had done it before. But dragging her son into it, humiliating her in front of him, cut deeper than anything else. Ethan stepped closer, his voice small but steady. "Mum, did you do something wrong?" Jamie bent down, brushing the hair from his forehead. Her smile wobbled, but her words were clear. "No, sweetheart, I didn't." Dalton clapped his hands once, the sound sharp enough to make Ethan flinch. "I'm finished here. Get your manager. Fire her. Right here, right now." The store seemed to stop breathing. Jamie's manager appeared almost instantly, pale and sweating, glancing nervously between Dalton and her. He looked at Jamie like a man standing on thin ice. "Please," he whispered, "just apologise." Jamie's hands shook, but when she looked at Ethan, standing there with his backpack, watching every move, she knew. Apologising might save her job, but it would destroy something far more important, the truth her son believed in. She straightened her shoulders. Her voice was trembling, but it carried through the aisle. "I won't apologise for something I didn't do." The hush that followed was suffocating. Even the shoppers who had been staring now lowered their eyes, pretending they hadn't seen. Dalton's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Then you're finished." And just like that, Jamie's world collapsed in front of her little boy. The manager's voice cracked as he spoke. "Jamie, I'm sorry, you're terminated, effective immediately." The words echoed louder than the beeping scanners at the front registers, louder than the rustling of plastic bags. For Jamie, it was as if the whole store went silent. She felt Ethan's small hand slip into hers, warm and trembling, his fingers clinging like he could somehow keep her from falling apart. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry in front of Dalton. He stood there with his arms crossed, satisfied, like a man who had just crushed an insect beneath his shoe. His assistants scribbled in their notebooks, already moving on to the next task, as if destroying someone's livelihood was nothing more than a line item. Shoppers whispered in the aisles. Some looked away quickly, pretending not to see. Others stared openly with that strange mix of pity and curiosity people show when they're glad it isn't happening to them. Jamie wanted to scream, to demand that someone speak up, but she knew better. No one would risk angering a man like Dalton. Her manager thrust a plain envelope toward her, avoiding her eyes. "Turn in your badge and keys. I'll mail your final paycheck." His hands shook. He looked more like a man begging for his own safety than someone enforcing company policy. Jamie slid off her name tag slowly, laying it on the counter. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried every long night, every rushed dinner break, every sacrifice she had made to keep her little family afloat. She picked up Ethan's backpack and placed it gently on his shoulders. "Let's go, sweetheart," she said softly. Her voice didn't waver, though her heart was breaking. They walked together down the aisle, each step a march of shame. The sound of her shoes against the linoleum floor rang out in the silence, echoing like a drumbeat she could never forget. Ethan glanced up at her, his eyes wide and wet. "Mum, are we going to be okay?" Jamie forced a smile, though her chest ached. She squeezed his hand tighter. "We will," she whispered, "I promise." As the sliding doors opened and the cool night air wrapped around them, Jamie felt the weight of everything crash down. The rent due in 2 weeks, the medicine refills she could barely afford, the empty fridge waiting at home. She had nothing but her dignity, and even that felt like a fragile shield against the storm. Behind her, the store lights glared bright and cold, a world she no longer belonged to. Ahead of her stretched the dark parking lot, dotted with the faint glow of street lamps. It felt like stepping into the unknown with nothing but her son's small hand in hers. Dalton thought he had won. But as Jamie walked into the night, head held high despite the tears burning her eyes, a quiet fire began to kindle deep inside her. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The apartment felt quieter than usual that night. Jamie sat on the worn couch, Ethan asleep in the bedroom after finally crying himself out. She stared at the ceiling, the shadows of the street lamp outside cutting across the walls, and tried to swallow the knot in her throat. Her hands were raw from hours of shelving boxes, but it wasn't the pain in her body that hurt the most. It was the look in her son's eyes when he asked if they would be okay. On the coffee table lay the badge she had turned in, the cheap plastic rectangle with her name printed in fading letters. She had slipped it into her bag without thinking, and now it mocked her. Years of work, gone in a single moment because she refused to bow her head. Her phone buzzed beside her. She almost ignored it, but the screen lit up with a name she knew well, Luis. "Jamie," his voice came through, hushed but urgent. "You need to see this." He sent her a link. Jamie tapped it, and her heart skipped as the video started to play. There she was, standing in the aisle facing Dalton's glare, her son watching wide-eyed from the end of the row. The words were clear, the humiliation raw. She could hear her own voice refusing to apologise. And then Dalton's command, sharp as a whip, "Fire her, right now." Luis spoke again, his voice trembling. "I filmed it. I couldn't just let it disappear. It's already spreading. People are angry, Jamie. They're on your side." Jamie's hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. Strangers were outraged, calling Dalton a bully, demanding accountability. Some wrote about being fired unfairly themselves. Others said no mother should be treated like that in front of her child. Her chest tightened, not from despair this time, but from something she hadn't felt in a long while: hope. For the first time that night, she wasn't invisible. Her voice, the one Dalton tried to silence, was being heard by thousands of people she didn't even know. She set the phone down, pressing her palms against her eyes as tears welled again. But they were different now. Not just tears of loss, but of possibility. From the bedroom, Ethan's soft breathing carried through the thin walls. Jamie glanced at the drawing he had taped above his bed earlier that week, the one of Supermom flying above a grey tower. She thought of how small and fragile she had felt walking out of that store. But maybe, just maybe, her son wasn't wrong. Jamie whispered into the empty room, her voice steady despite the quiver in her chest. "We're not finished. Not yet." The next morning, Jamie barely slept. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages, people she hadn't spoken to in years, strangers sending support, even reporters leaving voicemails. She scrolled through them with bleary eyes, overwhelmed. Part of her wanted to turn it all off and hide. Another part knew this was bigger than her now. When she dropped Ethan off at school, she kissed his forehead a little longer than usual. He clung to her sleeve, whispering, "Don't let them be mean to you again, Mum." Jamie forced a smile, promising she wouldn't, even though fear gnawed at her inside. By late afternoon, she found herself sitting in a small office above a bakery downtown. It smelled faintly of coffee and paper, nothing like the glass towers where men like Dalton made their deals. Across from her sat Clara, a young attorney from the community legal centre. Her dark hair was pulled back, her sleeves rolled up, and her desk was stacked high with case files. "I saw the video," Clara said, her voice calm but steady, "and I want you to know, what happened to you wasn't just cruel, it was unlawful. Jamie blinked, unsure if she had heard right. Unlawful? He just humiliated me and then my manager fired me. Exactly, Clara replied. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp with conviction. You were terminated at the demand of a customer who verbally abused you. That's wrongful termination. And if what I've heard from your co-workers is true, about unpaid overtime, then this isn't just your fight. It could open the door for everyone who's been cheated by that store. Jamie's stomach tightened. But he's Dalton, she whispered. Just saying his name made her throat dry. He has money, lawyers, connections, I'm just me. Clara didn't flinch. I've taken on men like him before. They count on people being too scared to stand up. But if you're willing, we can build a case. Not just against the store, but against the system that let him walk all over you. Jamie's hands trembled in her lap. She thought of the bills stacked on the counter at home, of Ethan's inhaler, of how easily Dalton had crushed her in front of a crowd. Fear pressed heavy on her chest. As if sensing it, Clara softened her tone. Listen, Jamie, this won't be easy. He'll fight back. He'll try to scare you, but you're not alone anymore. You have the truth, and the truth matters. Jamie let out a shaky breath. Through the window behind Clara, she could see kids walking home from school, their backpacks bouncing. She thought of Ethan again, his drawing of Supermom taped to the wall above his bed. Maybe he needed to see that heroes weren't the ones with capes, but the ones who refused to back down. Finally she nodded, her voice quiet but firm. Okay, let's do it. Clara smiled, not triumphantly, but with the kind of respect reserved for someone stepping into a fight they never asked for. She extended her hand across the desk. Then we start today. Jamie shook it, feeling both terrified and alive. For the first time since that night in the supermarket, she wasn't just a fired employee. She was something more. The beginning of a challenge Dalton never saw coming. For a few days, Jamie felt something she hadn't in a long time. Momentum. Clara and her small team began gathering statements, meeting with other employees who whispered about missing overtime pay and unfair treatment. Louise, nervous but determined, promised to testify. Each step was fragile, but it gave Jamie a sense of direction. Then came the letter. It arrived folded neatly in Ethan's backpack, tucked between his math worksheets and a note from the teacher. Jamie pulled it out at the kitchen table, scanning the words twice before they sank in. The school was discontinuing Ethan's small scholarship for summer learning programs. No explanation beyond vague language about funding changes and reallocation of resources. Her chest tightened. She knew exactly what it meant. Dalton had friends everywhere. City council members, school donors, people who owed him favours. Cutting Ethan's program was a message. Back off, or your son will pay the price. That night, Jamie sat on the edge of Ethan's bed as he carefully coloured in the drawing of his supermom. He didn't know about the letter yet. He just looked up at her with tired eyes and asked, "Will I still get to go to the summer program, Mum? You said they had science projects." Jamie's throat burned. She wanted to tell him the truth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she smoothed his hair and whispered, "We'll figure something out." When he drifted to sleep, she stepped into the hallway and pressed her back against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor. Her hands shook as she covered her face. She could fight for herself, but dragging Ethan into it, that was her greatest fear. The phone buzzed. It was Clara. "You got the letter, didn't you?" Her voice was steady, but Jamie could hear the anger underneath. "He's pushing back harder than I thought. This is how men like Dalton work. They don't just attack you, they attack what you love." Jamie wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "I can't let him hurt Ethan. Maybe I should walk away." There was a long pause, then Clara said softly, "Jamie, if you stop now, he wins. Not just against you, but against every worker he's crushed and every family he's threatened. But if you stand your ground, you don't stand alone. We'll protect Ethan, you have my word." Jamie glanced back at her son's room. The soft glow of his nightlight spilled into the hallway, illuminating the superhero drawing taped above his bed, Supermom. Her fear didn't vanish, but something stronger rose to meet it. She took a deep breath, her voice steadier now. "All right, he wants a fight? He'll get one." The attack came faster than Jamie expected. By the end of the week, her name appeared in a local news article that spread quickly online. The headline read, Former supermarket worker fired after pattern of misconduct. Her stomach turned as she read the words. The article claimed she had been caught stealing merchandise. A complete lie. It said she was known for stirring conflict with customers and had been on thin ice for months. None of it was true, but Dalton's influence didn't need truth, it needed headlines. When Jamie walked Ethan to school the next morning, she felt the shift immediately. A father she used to greet every morning avoided eye contact. Two mothers whispered at the gate, their eyes darting toward her before quickly looking away. Jamie gripped Ethan's hand tighter, her cheeks burning, wishing she could shield him from their stares. At the grocery store later that day, the whispers followed her again. Near the produce aisle, two cashiers leaned close. One of them muttered, not even trying to lower her voice. "That's the one who tried to pocket cash from the register. They said the boss had proof." Jamie turned away before they could see her face, leaving the basket she'd been carrying on the shelf. By the time she reached her apartment, she was shaking so hard she could barely fit the key into the lock. Inside, she dropped onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. The humiliation clung to her like smoke she couldn't wash off. She had lost her job, her son's scholarship, and now even her reputation. She thought about calling Clara and telling her she couldn't keep going. Maybe Dalton was right. Maybe fighting him was impossible. A small sound pulled her back. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding a folded piece of paper. His voice was soft. "I made this for you." She wiped her eyes and took it. This time, it wasn't just Supermom. He had drawn her standing tall with her hands on her hips, and behind her was a crowd of stick figures holding signs. At the top, in crooked block letters, he had written, "Mom is not alone." Her breath caught. She looked at him, small, hopeful, and scared all at once, and pulled him into her arms, holding him until his little arms squeezed back. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Luis. "Me and the others are ready to talk. You don't have to face him alone." Jamie stared at the screen, Ethan still pressed against her chest. The fear was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. Dalton wanted her broken. Instead, all he had done was remind her what she was fighting for. She kissed the top of her son's head and whispered, "Steady this time. He doesn't get to win." The courthouse wasn't grand. The paint on the walls was chipped, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the benches creaked when people shifted in their seats. Still, Jamie's stomach twisted, as if she were walking into a stadium full of cameras. She sat at the plaintiff's table beside Clara, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Across the aisle, Dalton looked as untouchable as ever. He wore a tailored suit, his posture relaxed, his lips curved in that same smug half-smile she remembered from the supermarket. His lawyers, 3 of them, shuffled stacks of papers, whispering strategies. To him, this was just another meeting, another problem to crush with money. Jamie glanced toward the gallery. Luis was there, along with 2 other co-workers who had finally gathered the courage to show up. They gave her small nods of encouragement. It wasn't much, but it steadied her breathing. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The proceedings began with Dalton's attorney, who wasted no time painting Jamie as the villain. She was insubordinate, disrespectful to customers, and rightly terminated. This lawsuit is nothing but an attempt to extort money from a respected businessman. Jamie's chest burned, but Clara placed a calming hand on her arm before she could react. When it was their turn, Clara rose with quiet confidence. "Your Honour," she said, her voice even, "this case is about more than a single firing. It is about abuse of power, unpaid wages, and the right of workers to stand with dignity. We intend to prove that my client was terminated not for misconduct, but for refusing to be humiliated by a man who thought himself above accountability." The first witness was Luis. His voice shook as he told the story of that night, how Dalton had demanded Jamie be fired, how the manager had obeyed without question. Dalton's attorney objected, tried to rattle him, but Luis stood firm. At one point he glanced at Jamie and said, "She was a good worker. We all knew it. We were just too afraid to say anything." Jamie felt tears sting her eyes. For so long she thought she had been invisible, just another name on a timesheet. Hearing someone finally say the truth out loud felt like a small crack in the wall Dalton had built around himself. Then came the video. Clara played the clip Louise had recorded. The aisle, the shouting, Dalton's command. The room grew heavy with silence. Even the judge leaned forward, his expression tightening. The cruelty was undeniable. Dalton shifted in his chair for the first time, his jaw stiffening. He whispered sharply to his lawyer, who scribbled notes in a hurry. Jamie sat taller. For weeks she had been called a liar, a troublemaker, a nobody. But in this room, with the truth projected for everyone to see, she felt something she hadn't dared to believe possible. Dalton wasn't untouchable. The hearing adjourned for the day, but as people filed out, Jamie caught Dalton's gaze. His eyes were cold, furious, but beneath them she saw something else, a flicker of fear. She squeezed her son's drawing, folded carefully in her bag, and whispered under her breath, "We're not done yet." The courtroom was packed when the decision came down. Workers from the store had shown up, sitting shoulder to shoulder on the wooden benches. A few reporters scribbled notes, though most of the city still assumed Dalton would walk out untouched. Jamie sat with her hands clasped tightly, Ethan's drawing folded inside her bag like a secret weapon. The judge cleared his throat and spoke with deliberate care. After reviewing the evidence, including testimony, payroll records, and the video provided, this court finds that Ms. Jamie Walker was wrongfully terminated. Furthermore, the supermarket is found to have engaged in improper wage practices. Restitution will be ordered. For a moment, Jamie didn't breathe. Then she heard Louise let out a sharp exhale behind her, followed by a ripple of relieved whispers. The judge's voice carried on, steady and final. The court also notes that this termination was carried out under pressure from Mr. Dalton. While he is not the direct employer, his conduct in this case has been deemed inappropriate and abusive. Dalton's jaw clenched. He looked less like a king and more like a man cornered, his lawyers whispering frantically at his side. Clara leaned closer and murmured, "We won." The words washed over Jamie like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For weeks she had carried the weight of shame, fear and doubt. Now it lifted, leaving behind exhaustion, but also something stronger, pride. Later that evening, she walked Ethan home from school. The air was crisp and the trees lining their block swayed in the wind. Ethan skipped beside her, holding her hand tightly. "So, does that mean you beat the bad guy?" he asked, looking up with wide eyes. Jamie laughed softly, the sound catching in her throat. "I don't know if I beat him," she said, "but I didn't let him beat us." When they reached this apartment, Ethan ran ahead and taped another drawing to the fridge. This one showed two stick figures, a small boy and a taller woman with a cape, standing side by side. Above them, in big crooked letters, he had written, "We won." Jamie stood there, staring at it, her eyes wet. She thought of all the nights she'd stayed awake, worrying about bills, about groceries, about failing her son. She thought of the humiliation in that store aisle, of the cold parking lot where she walked away with nothing. And then she looked at Ethan, grinning proudly as if he had drawn a masterpiece. She crouched down, pulled him into her arms and whispered, "You were right all along. Supermom's real." He giggled, wrapping his arms around her neck. "Told you." The fight had cost her dearly. But it had also given her something back, her voice, her dignity, and the unshakable belief that even the smallest person could stand up against the biggest bully. And as Jamie turned off the kitchen light that night, she knew this was only the beginning. This story reminds us that dignity is worth more than fear. No matter how powerful someone seems, the truth and the courage to stand up for it can turn the smallest voice into a force for change. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. I'm truly grateful for your time. If this touched you in any way, please give it a like and subscribe to support the channel. I'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.